Welcome to Pharma Pro Podcast.
I've heard of that one.
It's
pretty popular.
they've got this motto: listen to learn, apply to grow, master to lead.
Catchy.
That's right. Today's topic is of nitrosamine impurities. Welcome to the deep dive, where today we'll be venturing into a realm that's often overlooked but incredibly important: drug safety, specifically the issue of nitrosamine impurities. Now, I know that might sound a little intimidating, but don't worry, we're going to break it all down for you using some really fascinating FDA guidelines, expert analyses, and even a helpful study guide. Think of it as detective work, where we'll carefully analyze these sources and try to really understand these unwanted chemical compounds that sometimes find their way into our medications. Are there any situations where these bioequivalence studies might not be necessary?
The FDA has identified a few specific cases where they might be able to waive those studies, particularly when we're dealing with certain types of drugs and specific reformulations.
Can you give some examples of these situations?
Sure, if you have an immediate release solid oral drug or an oral suspension, and the only change that's being made is the addition of a very small amount of a specific antioxidant, the FDA might determine that this minor change is unlikely to impact how that drug works in the body.
So they're using their scientific expertise to make that judgment.
Exactly. They're not just blindly following a set of rules. They are applying their knowledge and their experience to make informed decisions that prioritize the well-being of patients.
But even in those cases where bioequivalence studies are waived, there's still some level of testing that's required, right?
Absolutely. Even though they might waive bioequivalence studies, they still require what's called comparative dissolution testing. This evaluates how quickly the drug dissolves in the body to make sure the reformulated version dissolves at the same rate as the original.
So it's a less comprehensive test, but still an important safeguard. Yeah. It sounds like the FDA is constantly trying to find that balance, that sweet spot between being thorough, but also pragmatic.
That's a perfect way to put it. They understand that it's important to address these nitrosamine issues efficiently, but they never compromise on safety or effectiveness.
It's good to know they're constantly looking for ways to improve the process, making it more efficient, without sacrificing those core values.
Finding those win-win solutions is really key. They want to protect patients from harm while also making sure that people have access to the medications that they need.
It's a tough balancing act. So far, we've really focused on the FDA's role in this whole process. But what about the manufacturers themselves? What are their responsibilities when it comes to addressing those nitrosamine risks?
Manufacturers play a really crucial role in implementing those nitrosamine mitigation strategies. They can't just wait for the FDA to tell them what to do. Proactivity is really important. They need to conduct their own risk assessments, perform confirmatory testing, and if they find a problem, they've got to take the necessary steps to address it. This might involve changing their manufacturing process, reformulating their product, or even switching suppliers. And they need to do all of this while still adhering to the FDA's requirements for quality and consistency.
So it sounds like it's a pretty challenging task for manufacturers to juggle all those responsibilities.
It is a demanding role, but they're not alone in this effort. Remember that collaborative spirit we talked about earlier. The FDA provides a lot of support to manufacturers throughout this whole process. They publish tons of guidance documents, hold workshops and webinars, and they're always available to answer questions and provide clarification. Their goal is really to help manufacturers navigate those regulations and understand what's expected of them.
So it's more of a partnership than, say, a dictatorial relationship.
It is a collaborative effort between the FDA and manufacturers. They're working together to ensure the safety of the drugs that we all rely on. And to kind of zoom in on some specific actions that manufacturers are taking to try to mitigate these risks, a lot of their attention has been focused on controlling those nitrites that can contaminate drugs through the excipients. Those seemingly harmless inactive ingredients that we talked about, they can be a big source of problems. So it's like they're going through and doing this really thorough, deep clean of their entire supply chain, scrutinizing every single ingredient that goes into their products.
It's like going back to the fundamentals, making sure you have that solid foundation for drug safety.
That's a great way to describe it. And if they find an excipient that's contaminated with nitrites, they have a couple of options. They can try to find a different excipient, one that's nitrite-free, or they can purify the existing excipient to remove those impurities.
So trying to filter out the bad stuff.
Exactly. But the solution isn't always that straightforward. Remember we talked about those potential trade-offs involved in switching excipients? It can impact how the drug dissolves or its overall stability. And purifying those excipients, well, that can be a costly and time-consuming process. So it really becomes this balancing act.
Weighing those benefits against the costs.
Right. And trying to find that balance between, effectiveness, but also keeping costs under control.
This seems like another area where the FDA's expertise could be really helpful for manufacturers.
Oh, absolutely. The FDA can really help manufacturers navigate those tricky decisions, weighing the pros and cons of different options, and helping them figure out the best path forward. It's a real partnership, working together to identify the safest and most practical solutions.
But controlling excipients, that's just one part of the equation, right? What are some of the other steps that manufacturers are taking to minimize those nitrosamine risks?
Well, they're also looking at ways to actually tweak their API manufacturing processes to prevent nitrosamine formation from happening in the first place. This might involve optimizing reaction conditions, maybe avoiding certain solvents that are known to be problematic, or even substituting certain ingredients for safer alternatives.
It's amazing how much control they have over this process, how they can really fine-tune every little detail to minimize those risks.
It is pretty remarkable, and this is a field that's constantly evolving with new discoveries about how to effectively control nitrosamine formation happening all the time. It's important to remember that this is a relatively new challenge, and the science is moving really quickly.
So everyone's really working hard to stay ahead of the curve.
There are. And the FDA plays a really crucial role in supporting that ongoing learning and improvement. They're always updating those guidance documents, funding new research, and working closely with manufacturers to share best practices. They're not just setting the standards, but they're actively contributing to the science and promoting this environment where everyone can collaborate and learn from each other.
So it really is a global effort to tackle this challenge, isn't it?
It is. And you see regulatory agencies around the world joining forces, recognizing that this is a problem that affects everyone and requires a united front to find solutions.
It's great to see that level of international cooperation and dedication. Zooming back in on the FDA for a moment, you've talked about their heavy involvement in regulating those nitrosamine levels, but it seems like they're also providing a lot of support to manufacturers.
Right, that's an important point. The FDA isn't just an enforcer, they're also an educator and a facilitator. They're committed to making sure that manufacturers understand and comply with those regulations, and they offer a wealth of resources to help them navigate this whole complex landscape.
It sounds more like a partnership than a purely adversarial relationship.
Absolutely. The FDA recognizes that manufacturers are really at the forefront of this fight against nitrosamines and that they need support to be successful. And that support comes in a lot of different forms.
So how do they actually provide that support? What kind of resources are we talking about here?
Well, they publish incredibly detailed guidance documents that outline best practices for mitigating nitrosamine risks. Those documents are like roadmaps. They help manufacturers navigate the process without having to guess their way through it. They also hold workshops and webinars to share the latest information and answer any questions that manufacturers might have. It's a real two-way conversation, ensuring that everyone's on the same page and working together effectively.
So that collaborative approach really seems to foster a much more productive working relationship.
It does, and the FDA is always open to feedback. They want to hear from manufacturers about what's working, what challenges they're facing, and how those guidance documents can be improved. It's a really dynamic process, constantly evolving to meet new challenges and incorporate new knowledge and best practices.
And it sounds like all of this collaboration and effort is paying off. Have we seen any tangible results from these efforts to reduce nitrosamine levels?
The FDA has made remarkable progress in reducing nitrosamine levels in drugs over the past few years. Those mitigation strategies are proving to be really effective. But it's important to remember that this is an ongoing battle. We're constantly discovering new nitrosamines, the science is constantly evolving, so the FDA is committed to staying vigilant and adapting their approach to ensure that we maintain those high safety standards for all medications.
So they're not just resting on their laurels, they're constantly evaluating their processes and trying to stay ahead of the curve. This deep dive has really given me a whole new appreciation for the incredible amount of work that goes on behind the scenes to ensure the safety of our medications.
You're absolutely right. It's a hidden world that most people aren't aware of, but it's a world that affects every single one of us.
And it's a world where collaboration is really key, right?
Yeah.
Manufacturers need to be proactive, the FDA needs to be vigilant, and we as consumers need to stay informed and engaged. asking questions, and learning about our medications.
We're all in this together. It's a team effort to make sure that our medicine cabinets are stocked with safe and effective treatments.
It's a good reminder that those tiny pills that we take, they have a huge impact on our health.
And thankfully, there are so many dedicated people working tirelessly to make sure that those pills are as safe as possible.
Our deep dive today has really shed light on a world that we don't often get to see.
It's a world of meticulous science, rigorous regulation, and a shared commitment to protecting public health. It's a world where knowledge is constantly evolving, challenges are met with innovation, and the pursuit of safer medications is always a top priority.
It's a world that deserves our attention and our active participation.
Together, we can ensure that the medications we rely on are as safe and effective as possible.
And now, to focus in on one particular aspect of this complex landscape, let's dig a little deeper into the role that manufacturers play in mitigating those nitrosamine risks. We've already touched upon their responsibilities, but let's explore in more detail the concrete actions they're taking to ensure the safety of their products.
Manufacturers are really focusing their efforts on controlling those nitrites that can contaminate drugs through those excipients. Those seemingly harmless, inactive ingredients, they can be a significant source of contamination, as we've discussed. So it's really like they're going through and doing a deep clean of their entire supply chain, scrutinizing every single ingredient that goes into their products to make sure it's pure.
It makes sense that they're really focused on those fundamental ingredients, making sure that foundation is solid.
Right, and if a manufacturer finds an excipient that is contaminated with nitrites, they have a couple of options. They can try to find an alternative excipient that's nitrite-free, or they can purify the existing excipient to remove those impurities.
Trying to filter out the bad stuff.
Exactly. But finding a solution isn't always that easy. We talked earlier about those trade-offs involved in switching excipients. It can affect how the drug dissolves or its stability. And purifying those excipients, well, that can be a very expensive and time-consuming process, so it really becomes a balancing act.
Weighing those benefits against the costs.
Right, and trying to find that balance between effectiveness and keeping costs under control.
So this seems like another area where the FDA's expertise could be really helpful for manufacturers.
Oh, absolutely. The FDA can really help manufacturers navigate those tough decisions, weigh the pros and cons of different options, and help them figure out the best way forward. It's a real partnership, working together to find the safest and most practical solutions.
But controlling excipients is only one part of the puzzle. What about those other steps that manufacturers are taking to address those nitrosamine risks during the manufacturing process itself?
Well, they're also looking at ways to actually adjust their API manufacturing processes to try and prevent nitrosamine formation from happening in the first place. And this might involve optimizing reaction conditions, avoiding solvents that are known to be problematic, or substituting some ingredients with safer alternatives.
It's amazing how they can fine-tune those details to really minimize those risks.
It really is. And this is a field that is constantly evolving. There's new research coming out all the time with new discoveries about how to control nitrosamine formation more effectively. And it's important to remember that this is a relatively new challenge and the science is moving very quickly.
So everyone's working hard to stay ahead of the curve.
They are. And the FDA plays a crucial role in supporting that ongoing learning and improvement. They're constantly updating their guidance documents, they're funding research, and they're working really closely with manufacturers to share best practices. They're not just setting those standards, but they're actively contributing to the science and promoting this environment where everyone can collaborate and learn from each other.
So it really is a global effort to tackle this challenge.
It is. And you see regulatory agencies around the world joining forces, recognizing that this is a problem that affects everyone, and it really does require a united front to find solutions.
It's inspiring to see that level of international cooperation. Talked a lot about the FDA's role in regulating those nitrosamine levels, but it seems like they're also providing a lot of support to manufacturers as well.
Right, and that's an important point. The FDA isn't just an enforcer, they're an educator, they're a facilitator. They're really committed to making sure that manufacturers understand those regulations and can comply with them. And they offer a ton of resources to help manufacturers navigate this really complex landscape.
Sounds more like a partnership than an adversarial relationship.
It absolutely is. The FDA recognizes that manufacturers are really on the front lines of this fight against nitrosamines, and they need that support to be successful. And that support comes in a lot of different forms.
So how do they actually provide that support? What kinds of resources are we talking about?
Well, they publish really detailed guidance documents that outline the best practices for mitigating those nitrosamine risks. And these documents are like roadmaps. They help manufacturers navigate that whole process without having to just guess their way through it. They also hold workshops and webinars to share the latest information, answer questions that manufacturers might have, and it's a two-way conversation, making sure everyone's on the same page and working together.
So it sounds like that collaborative approach really helps foster a much more productive working relationship.
It does, and the FDA is always open to feedback. They want to hear from manufacturers about what's working, what challenges they're running into, and how those guidance documents can be improved. It's a really dynamic process. It's constantly evolving to meet those new challenges, incorporate new knowledge and new best practices.
All of this hard work and collaboration, it seems like it's paying off. Have we seen any actual progress in terms of reducing those nitrosamine levels in medications?
The FDA has actually made really remarkable progress in reducing nitrosamine levels in drugs over the past few years. And those mitigation strategies, they are proving to be very effective. But it's important to remember that this is an ongoing battle. We're constantly discovering new nitrosamines, and the science is always evolving. So the FDA has to stay vigilant and adapt their approach as needed to make sure we maintain those high safety standards for all of our medications.
They're not resting on their laurels. They're constantly reevaluating and trying to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly informative. It's really given me a new appreciation for just how much work goes on behind the scenes to make sure that our medications are safe.
It's a hidden world that most people don't even know exists, but it affects all of us.
It really does. And it's a world where collaboration is key, right? Manufacturers have to be proactive, the FDA has to be vigilant, and we as consumers have to stay informed and engaged, asking questions and learning about our medications.
We're all in this together. It's a team effort to make sure that our medicine cabinets are stocked with those safe and effective treatments.
It's a good reminder that those tiny pills that we take can have such a big impact on our health.
And thankfully, we have all those dedicated people working behind the scenes to make sure that those pills are as safe as possible.
Our deep dive today has really shed light on a world that we don't often get to see.
A world of meticulous science, rigorous regulation, and this shared commitment to protecting public health. It's a world where the knowledge is constantly evolving, where those challenges are met with innovation, and where the pursuit of safer medications is always a top priority.
And it's a world that deserves our attention and our participation.
We can all work together to ensure that the medications we rely on are as safe and effective as possible.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of nitrosamine impurities in drugs. We hope that this episode has shed some light on this very important topic. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deeper.